In my opinion, there's one thing that keeps more men addicted to pornography than anything else. One thing specifically. And in today's episode of The Rebuilt Man, I'm going to reveal to you what that thing is and give you some practical steps, tips, and takeaways so that if you've been struggling with breaking free from pornography addiction, you will have a bulletproof game plan leaving today's episode. Guys, if you do not know who I am, my name is Coach Frank Rich, founder of Rebuilt Recovery and host of the Rebuilt Man podcast. And in the last 5 years, I've personally coached over 1,500 men from the depths of pornography addiction to walking in clear and absolute freedom. And we use a proven 12-step framework to help these men get out of addiction, rewire their brains, rebuild their body, reconnect intimacy into their lives, and go on to live the life that they've all been called to live. And when I started this work back in 2019, I saw gaps. I saw some holes in the way that people were talking about addiction. I saw some gaps in the way that people were helping other people out of addiction. And I don't think that my philosophy here is just about pornography addiction, but that's what I've dedicated my life to doing because that's who I was for 20 plus years. That was a thing that had a grip on me for more than half of my life. And getting on the other side of it, I felt a call from God that I was placed here to help men just like you. So if you have been struggling, brother, I want you to know that there is hope. There is a way out of this. But the thing that is probably holding you back is you are lacking a clear and absolute vision for what your life can be and should be without pornography. Here's what I mean. When did you first look at porn? If you're struggling with a pornography addiction, chances are it didn't happen late in life. In my experience of coaching thousands of men, we've only had a handful that were introduced to pornography in their 20s. Most of the men that get caught up in this was something that was introduced to them very early on. And if you're watching or listening to this right now, you grew up more than likely in the technology generation. Now, we know today that the average age of first exposure to pornography is 8 to 11 years old. So before your brain is even equipped and developed to handle the conversation around sex, around intimacy, around technology, around exploitation, around trafficking, before you're even introduced to these concepts in your mind and have conversations around them, you are being introduced to something that is highly stimulating, highly addictive. We know the research points to the fact that internet streaming pornography is almost just as addictive as cocaine and meth. Now, I'm not saying that the effects are as damaging, but the way that it hijacks our brain, the way that it hijacks our reward system is very, very similar. So we get introduced to something at a very young age. Then we grow up with this. It becomes a place of comfort. It becomes a place of escape, a place of stress release, a place of release. So through our adolescent, teenage, and early adult years, this becomes normal patterns of behavior. Now, we talk to all our friends. We're indoctrinated into a very sexified culture. Porn is thrown at us everywhere we go. So we see this as normal behavior. How many men out there today believe that watching porn is normal? I hear from women all the time. I hear from young men that finally woke up and said, I didn't realize how damaging this was. I always thought that this was normal. So when I say you're lacking a clear vision of what your life can be and should be without pornography, it's not your fault. You were grown into and live in a world that is pornified, and it's nobody's fault. Maybe there's an agenda. We don't need to get into that in this episode. We've addressed it in other episodes of the podcast here before. But when you try to think about quitting porn, you are trying to quit as a person that has always looked at it as normal behavior. You've never been able to actually walk in freedom. You've never not been a slave to this thing. So when you try to quit, you're trying to quit as somebody that sees the world through a pornographic lens. You're trying to quit and you're trying to create new behaviors, seeing the world through a pornographic lens. So I think the first thing that we have to do, and this is what we coach our men early on in our program to do, is envision a life in the future. Okay, this takes visualization. This takes real effort. This takes real work. This takes disconnecting yourself from technology and getting in a quiet place and allowing your mind to calm down. And I put together a 5-part training series that will actually walk you through this Okay, so if you go to rebuildrecovery.com/vision, I actually give you the entire protocol in our program that we've helped thousands of men create a life free of pornography. So what we have to do here is we have to think about who can we become? What can our life look like? And then begin to unpack these things, right? So you probably know that there's certain things that trigger you. If you spend some time and audited the last couple of weeks and the last couple of instances with pornography, you would see patterns. You would see series of patterns that led up to that relapse, that led up to that consumption of porn. So what we have to understand is those things are still going to happen in your life. If you were a porn-free man, though, how would you act and respond differently? Here's a prime example. On one of our group coaching calls a few weeks back, we had a gentleman bring a personal struggle and challenge. I won't share his name here, but this was a very personal struggle to him. He lives in the city. He walks down a lot of alleyways that have big billboards. Okay, there's a lot of advertising, there's a lot of marketing. Sex sells. We know this, right? So he was struggling that every time he turned down a particular street, he would see this billboard and it would immediately trigger him into lustful thinking and sexual thoughts. Now, this isn't something that I personally have ever struggled with. I didn't live in that city. I didn't see that billboard. For me, looking at advertisements wasn't a trigger in my addiction, but for him, it specifically was. So it's hard for me to say what I did. But what I could do is I could walk him through a framework and walk him through an understanding that that thing is still going to be there. Whether or not you're addicted to porn, that billboard is still going to be there. That beautiful woman at the Starbucks is still going to be there. That girl at the gym that triggers you and gets you to sexually objectify her is still going to be there. So unless you plan on changing where you live and leaving this earth, you need to learn to deal with these things as a porn-free man. So instead of saying, how do I not look at that billboard so it doesn't trigger me? The better question is to ask, if I was a porn-free man, how would I respond to that billboard? You see, the difference here is instead of saying this thing did this to me, I'm a victim to it now, empower yourself to say, next time I see that billboard, how would I respond differently if I was a man that walked in freedom? Okay, another prime example, just recently, I had an individual that was traveling. Okay, he's been in our program for a couple of weeks, having a lot of success, but he's been staying in his current environment. And we know that's not going to be the case for all of us. We're going to have to go to the airport. We're going to have to visit new cities. We're probably going to go to a beach. We're going to go to a swimming pool. We're going to be put into these environments that would trigger porn addicts. But how do free men respond? So his concern was every time walking through the airport, he would get erections. The minute he saw a beautiful woman, it would warp his mind. It would take over all of his thoughts. He would begin to sexually objectify, and it would get to the point where he was physically having to fight these erections. Okay, so what are you going to do? Are you going to not fly? Are you going to drive everywhere you go? Are you going to have 5 a.m. flights? That may help a little bit, but what happens when you land in the city that you're going to? Okay, so you could put sunglasses on. You could walk around like a creep and not look at anybody. Or you could ask yourself, if I was a man that walked in freedom from pornography, how would I show up at the airport? What would my thoughts be when I saw that woman? When I saw her and she triggered me, what would I do? So if I was a porn-free man, how would I show up in these scenarios? And that's casting a vision in your life for the man that you need to be. Now, here's what happens is when you are in those scenarios, because you've done the preliminary work and you've injected these thoughts, you've thought about these things, you've journaled on them, they're at the conscious level of your awareness, you can act on them. Now, you need to be intentional about how you act and respond, right? This isn't something you just do this assignment one time and then it's indoctrinated and ingrained into you. You have to be conscious about these things early on. Okay, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reprogram your subconscious. We're trying to reprogram the way that you automatically respond, but that takes a level of conscious work and awareness early on. So what are the environments that trigger you? The gym was one for me. So I still to this day have a prayer that I walk myself through as I'm going into the gym. Lord, I'm here to serve and honor you. I'm not going to sexually objectify women. If I see a beautiful woman, I will acknowledge that she's a beautiful woman, but she's not mine to participate in. You see, I've done the groundwork here. So now when I'm presented with those struggles and challenges, they don't trigger me in the way that they used to. Somebody that likes to watch movies, and you know that, hey, this movie that I'm going to watch may have some triggering scenes. How would a porn-free man watch this movie and not have it trigger him? How would a porn-free man step into the environments that trigger you and not have them trigger him? You see, that's having a vision for the man that we can become. That's having a vision for how we will walk and navigate life. And that is the mistake that I see so many men make, because what they do is they think about all the things that trigger them. They think about all the reasons as to why they failed in the past, and that's what their mind sees. As you're listening right now, hit pause, okay? And in a minute, I'm going to have you do something. So I want you to hit pause in wherever you are. If you're listening at home, if you're driving, don't do this. But I want you to look around and tell me how many things you saw that were brown. Okay, so you just looked around in the environment, you looked around in all the room, and you looked for the brown things. How many things did you see that were blue? Okay, now pause it again and look around in your environment. How many blue things are there? You see the difference here is the first time you're looking for brown, so blue didn't stand out. Then when I asked you to look for blue, you saw all the blue stuff. Well, it was there before. So here's what I'm trying to get across. When you think about all the reasons as to why you're addicted to porn, when you think about all the reasons as to why you may fail, when you think about all the things that may trigger you, when you step out in the world, that's what your mind is trained to go and find. Think about all the things that you need to be free. Think about the way that you respond in scenarios as a free man. And that is what your mind is going to reveal to you. It sounds simple. It is simple in application, but it's hard in execution, okay? Because you're going to fail. You're going to slip up. You're going to potentially not do this right the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, eighth time. But it's your ability to trust in this process. It's your perseverance to continue to fight in the hard and difficult times. So change the things you think about. Think about the man that you need to be, walking in absolute freedom. Visit rebuiltrecovery.com/vision if you actually want a training to walk you through a 5-step process to identify the man that you can be and get clear on the life that you can live without pornography. Guys, I hope today's episode was valuable. If it was, you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe, share, give it a thumbs up, drop a comment below, guys. We are really seeking your help right now in feeding this algorithm and getting this message and getting these episodes out to as many people as possible. If you're tuning on the audio side, make sure to rate, review, subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to. Rebuiltrecovery.com/vision though, if you want that free 5-step training. Your host, Coach Frank Rich at The Rebuilt Man. We love you guys. We'll see you in the next one.